Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video. Today we are analyzing a game from round 7 of the Norway Chess tournament currently happening in the city of Stavanger. This game was played in the women's section between the 5-time Women's World Chess Champion Ju Wenjun and the Iranian-Spanish international master Sarah Khadem. So without further ado, let's go. Ju Wenjun is playing with the white pieces, and I believe the first time they played it ended in a draw, and then Ju Wenjun won in the Armageddon. So now they have swapped colors. Ju Wenjun begins with c4, which is the English opening. It is one of the openings she prefers, and I believe she played it a few times in the Women's World Chess Championship. And, well, it's a less commonly played opening when compared to d4 and e4, which was the two top priorities, but it's also a very interesting opening as there are many different ideas with it. So firstly, you are taking away the d5 square, and you're also preparing to fianchetto the bishop on the very strong diagonal, and then develop the knight, create, maybe push d3 eventually. It's a very practical and interesting opening, and Ju Wenjun plays it a lot. Knight f6, knight f3, e6, g3, that's all prep, and it's something I'm not too familiar with, but the players certainly are. Well, Sarah Khadem develops in the center and pushes a pawn forwards. This is perhaps to control more space, and maybe there are certain ideas of playing c5 and in the future e5 and having this very strong presence in the center. It also locks up the position. It's quite an interesting move also. Ju Wenjun decides to castle and Sarah Khadem plays c5. Again, the plan of having a very strong center, occupying space. When white lets you occupy space in the center, it makes sense for black to take it. Ju Wenjun undermines the e3 with e3, undermines the d4 pawn. It makes sense. It creates tension, and if it were to be taken, then white has a relatively comfortable position because white is ahead of development. The knight is out, the bishop is out, it's already castled, and if this trade were to happen, then white is really comfortable because the rook now has the open file, the knight is going to go b3 and bishop c2. White is going to have a beautiful position. As you can see here, the engine is really evaluating plus 0.7 here. This doesn't happen, Sarah Khadem develops, Ju Wenjun takes and takes. So this pawn is a pretty good pawn. It's like a barrier for the black pieces. It's taking away key squares, but it can also become a target. It's also taking away squares on c3 for the knight, but it can also become a target in the future. And Sarah Khadem maybe wants to play e5 to defend the pawn. d3 is played to secure the pawn, enabling the movement of the dark square bishop. The knight is also going to rotate through d2, and maybe go to b3, putting pressure on the pawn, or e4 in the center. The pawn is defended. Rook e1, just a developing move, preventing any e5 from happening. Castles, and bishop g5. And the bishop takes the knight on f6. Now, this is also a very nice move, because the knight was stronger than the bishop. Because black has this very strong pawn on d4 that takes away many squares, I will play the next move, the dark square bishop is pretty much useless. And it's weak on the f4 square, as it could be attacked with e5 with tempo, and it's not really needed anywhere else. So actually taking the knight in this case, which is a rare occurrence where the knight is better than the bishop, is actually very good. As we talked before, the knight develops, queen slides out. Now there's no threat of having any attacks, pins, with knight e4, the bishop, because if it didn't, if let's say h6 was played, then maybe there are some tactics. There are ways to go back and defend, but now white has a more comfortable bishop, a more comfortable knight. Anyhow, a3 is played, a5, knight jumps in, and we have a trade. So what we have in the position now is white has a really strong light squared bishop, and black is left with an isolated pawn. Well, not isolated pawn, but it's a target on d4, and the bishops they're bishop pair, but they're weaker than white's knight and white's light square bishop. So let's see how Ju Wenjun will convert this. the queen slides out. The queen slides out here, lateral defense, also putting pressure on c5 on the bishop, and the bishop is quite weak. You know, the only squares are e6, maybe putting pressure. Anyhow, the bishop is weak. So the bishop slides out and the rooks are doubled. This was a really nice attack with like a tempo. Because if black were to play like g6, I don't know, f6, the pawns would become weak and they would become more targets. So light square bishop develops, f4, more aggressive moves, and the rook develops. The rook slides back to e2 is also a very interesting move, and I think it deserves an exclamation mark, because the idea is to defend the b2 pawn, which is a target in the future, horizontally, and also when the knight will move, it can move with a tempo, and the pawn will be defended. So a4 locks the position, creating a target on b2, and the knight develops. b5, and after a trade, now there's a pin, but it's an indirect pin, so maybe a move like f6 would work. So now what we have there is a 2-on-1, but white's light square bishop is very good. Queen slides out, it had to, because f6 was very strong, and the rooks double up on the b-pawn. Ju Wenjun strikes out, the bishop develops, and Ju Wenjun picks up a bishop. Queen recaptures on d7. This pawn is still a weakness, and there may be one more weakness created here, if this pawn becomes a target for the future. White's weaknesses are also evident. They are on b2 and d3, but they're harder to get to. Another target. Bishop h3 jumps out to attack the e6 pawn, creating a pin, and also the king is on the light square, so in the future there could be checks and reroutes. Bishop gives a check and shuts off the entire e-file. Also a very nice move, very nice find. We have a few moves to reroute the pieces. This is normal, and now we will see how Ju Wenjun applies pressure to win a engine-like drawn position, but both sides can play. Bishop slides back to get the diagonal. We have a trade. This is a weakness now, this is a weakness, and this is a weakness. Rook goes to b, the queen picks up a pawn. We have the rook picks up, and now we have an isolated pawn on a3, which is ready to promote. Check. And the plan is now very clear. The rook is going to go to a1 in the future, and the pawn is going to run, supported by the light square bishop and the queen. The pawn is running, and black attempts to create its own counterplay, maybe attacking the rook, also seeing if there are threats against the king. Rook slides out, defending the king. Black blunders another pawn through an intermezzo tactic with a check, and the rook can be defended. We can see a trade. A trade benefits white because despite the opposite colored bishops, the pawn is very strong, and this pawn could fall off. If this pawn falls off, it's over. So we have a bit more shuffling, and black loses another pawn because this pawn cannot be guarded. And now with two passed pawns, the game is over. We have a few more moves. Before eventually the Women's World Chess Champion converts the winning position. So Ju Wenjun is now winning the tournament with 11.5. We have 3 more rounds remaining, and it will be pretty interesting.